Hey guys, and welcome to the Foundation Art Group. My name is Matthew Zickery, and today we're talking interior line drawings. So right now we're looking at a demo that we did previously called Creating Level Variations. And that's the demo up top. Down here at the bottom I have some references I pulled off Google. And we're going to go ahead and make a selection right now. And I'm going to take this middle design that we created and explore some of the possible interiors that we can create. And we're going to do this in a 3/4 top-down view just so we can have more information that we can present to the team, team of modelers as well as your art director. So here we have some reference, just various different objects in the room as well as materials that we'll be using. So I'm going to go ahead now and grab this file, and since I have multiple monitors, I'm just going to drag it right off to the other side. That way I can always have it open while I'm doing my design. So here is this basic design that we have with this building, and it's kind of very simple. It's a rectangle, and there's not really much going on when we look at it frontally. So let's go ahead and explore some top-down views. So there's number one, a basic rectangle. Let's go ahead and let's try a second one right now. So looking at the reference, I could see that there's a little protrusion out there, so we can add that, but it's still pretty boring. It's just a rectangle. So let's see, how can we change this? Maybe let's make some cuts and make it like an L shape. And I'm sure even the room that you're in right now, it might just be a square or a rectangle, or it could have something more going on in it. And since, this is a front view, we can go very deep or, not as deep. We can make different cuts. We can add these extra layers that could be even, a little bit of a raised platform if want be. We can make diagonal cuts. And we're really just trying to go with some interest right now. So that's a possibility, but I think we're going to go with this one here, just so we have something basic, easy enough to follow for demo purposes, but still more interesting than a basic rectangle. So what I like to do first is I like to plan my top-down view. And for those that have a good perspective understanding, this is going to be very important for you because it makes life that much easier. You're able to fully plan out your space just very similarly to an architect. So right here, I'm kind of, I'm looking over at my reference. I'm looking at my original design, and I'm like, okay, I see like there's some type of fireplace back there. And what I can even do is take it, duplicate it. I'm gonna stretch it up. Now that way I can kind of just really lay everything out. Depends how accurate we need to be, but now I can estimate pretty good where my opening is, where my doors are, where my windows are. Even where the chimney would be back here. And we don't have to stick 100% to our original design, but its basic layout, is very essential. So we're trying to be as accurate as we can, but without limiting ourselves. Alright, so maybe I'll have a chimney back there. Keeping in mind, I don't know exactly what everything I'm doing in this layout is. Obviously it's something long and rectangular. It can be a table, but it doesn't have to be. We're just trying to go for an interesting design. And another very useful tip is don't have everything just butted against the walls. Think of interesting ways that a user can come and interact with this room. They're going to walk through these doors, and we don't want them only to walk in a square, or straight. We want them to be able to interact with the room, go left and right. If they want to get to that back corner of the room, maybe they have to go deeper into the room first and, bust a left. And just various ways for them to interact here. And the reason why that's important is when we're doing these designs, They're for some other product, you know, they're for a film, they're for a video game, they're for a theme park, and you want everyone to be entertained when they're watching the screen or interacting with it. So if we have a film here, you can imagine a camera pan, say, following the character. If we have a POV view, it's gonna go straight, left, right. It's gonna have to look backwards. It's gonna be a lot more interactive. And having all these different objects too allow for more depth, because when we're looking at them, we can see the table in front with the fireplace behind it, and that's going to create much more depth on this flat screen. And that's what's very important about designing this set, this layout. So back there, I thought that could be another door opening. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to save this little layout out. That way I have it for reference later. But this is pretty much what we're going to go with. And we don't have to be exactly 100% to the layout again, but it's there for our general guidance. Unless we're supposed to be 100% to it. But luckily here, I'm art directing my own image, so I get to decide. So here I've taken the hexagon tool. You can look at the settings at the top, which, you know, of course, have disappeared now, but it was at 99 on a star, or 100 in a star for the scale. And then zooming really out, keeping this on a shape layer, I can zoom out really far and move it around to whatever perspective grid I want to have. And the benefit of having this on a shape layer and zoomed out so far is it keeps the path, meaning I can duplicate it and rotate it to create more lines. And I can duplicate it and hold shift and drag it to the other side, keeping the same horizon line, which is obviously very important. If we have a tilted horizon line, then everything in the drawing is going to be tilted. And if you're not familiar with those, and I highly recommend you guys look at some of the previous sessions where we do more basic perspective. So here, I'm going to go ahead and create an actual horizon line layer. So I'm taking out some guides, Control R for the rulers. And I can bring out these guides. And what's amazing about this is when I hide everything and create a new line tool, just line from one corner to one corner, I have both vanishing points and the horizon line. So we can put these guides back. Bye-bye. There it is. Those are our vanishing points and horizon line. Very useful in case we ever lose these right here. I take a brush tool and I click on the layer. That's going to rasterize it. Rasterize means that I'll just get the pixel information. And what's important about doing this as a shape and not as pixels from the get-go is if you do it as pixels, those lines are going to be huge, huge. But since we're doing this as a shape, they're going to stay true to the actual size depending on the path that was created. So that pixel right there, that line could have been, you know, a 20 pixel long line. But since we did it that way, we're going to be safe. So let's go ahead and clean this grid up a little bit, lower the opacity, and then that way we can just leave it there. Those of you that, you know, you can definitely do your layout in a 3D program or Google SketchUp, any of those. That way you can already have a perspective grid from the get-go. I'm just showing you guys how to do this from the bottom up. Literally from the bottom layout. And we're going to draw everything up. And you can see just how useful this is. We're doing a perspective warp right now, holding control and grabbing those points. Gonna match it up into perspective, and I'm keeping in mind that I'm gonna have to draw these walls up, so I don't want it to be too close to the top edge per se. Taking a look at the image on the left, having to resize it a little bit so it's not so squashed. And as you guys are familiar, I start all my layers in Photoshop files out cleanly. I label them all, and by the end, we're at like layer 267 and you can't find anything. But at least I try. I start it that way so I can stay organized, and then you get to a certain point where, for me at least, the organization is less important. So here I'm realizing that I need a third vanishing point. I didn't have to, but for the image it's going to make it a lot more dynamic. And it's also going to stay truer to a 3D program when someone else is trying to duplicate it. They can understand what type of lens you're trying to use, how zoomed out we are. and it's what our human eye sees, which, it's typically a bonus. Alright, you saw I took the crop tool and then I hit enter with deleted pixels on. That way I'm not working with like a 10 gig file just because I have all this useless information on the outside of my document. I duplicated and rotated it so I can get finer lines. Here I'm showing you if you hold shift and move it up and down, you can get a different sense of the vanishing point of how far that third point is. So I like to keep it fairly down, but enough so we can have some dynamic walls and verticals in the space. It does make it more difficult to draw because we're not able to essentially just hold shift and drag for our verticals, but it's going to be that much better of an image. Doing our nice slowly transform until we're happy with this. And there we go, we cropped it, we named it, and we're naming stuff that we're just gonna hide inside a group and never see again anyway. But there it is, lower opacity. And here let's go ahead and switch it back to pixels, since now we're going to drawing mode and we're gonna kind of just draw in some back walls. And you're gonna see that we're kind of hugging the edge as is right now. So we're definitely gonna drop the file. And when we do that, we're gonna have to take the grid with us. So here we go. Let's decide how tall we want it. So when I flipped the original image, I was kind of looking at the ratio earlier of how tall versus how wide this is. So that right there is about how tall we can make the door. Oh, looks like I don't have enough real estate there. Time to drop it. Gotta unlock the grid. Get annoyed. Unlock the interior files. Drag it down. Imagine if I did this on paper. I would have been screaming right now. Got out all my anger. Got a coffee and then restarted. In that order. But luckily this is Photoshop, so we don't have to do that. Alright, looks like we're missing a vertical right there. Let's drag it up, eyeing our reference, our grid. And it matches pretty good, so we're able to, match it. It's not 100% accurate, but that's alright. Let's not get caught up on the perspective. Let's just have this as a nice general grid for us. Which you can especially see at the top left over there, where I'm erasing, that those lines aren't matching up 100%, but no worries, we'll correct everything later. And it'll just be our grid for now. So it looks like I'm going to go ahead and separate here these back walls from the front ones. And same thing with the top portion. Just because I don't want those front walls visible when we're doing our drawing. So here's the overview. We're kind of looking out at a cutout of this room. Let's go ahead and just organize everything a little bit now. And we're pretty much ready to sketch. So at this phase is when you're going to take a look at your reference. You're going to see what it is exactly that you want to draw in there, as well as envision how your character will interact with their space. So this is a blacksmith. I'm envisioning a lot of tools, a lot of workbenches that he can, go and do his smithing on. And just prepping the file right now for us to go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's get to it. So here's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where I want a nice path for how our character can walk throughout this room. Go in, around, left, right, backwards, yada yada yada. Let's get our brush, find the optimal size, and just sketch in. So I'm definitely not the world's best sketch artist, as we could tell. You guys are probably 10 times better than me. But I'm really quickly just laying in information. You know, I'm not worried about pretty lines. I'm not super worried about perspective. I just want to go based off my layout. So thinking there's these couple of tables right here. That back one is where a lot of the hammering is going to be done. So I didn't want a wood table. I was thinking something, you know, more like a slab of cement or something like that. Get some of the tools in here that he'll be using. You know, want this stuff fairly close to the fireplace, so that way I kind of envision him going to the fireplace, and if we're turning around or if we have a POV, we go to the fireplace, we turn around, there's a table right there that we can start operating on. That way we're not running across the room with hot material, spilling everywhere, causing a fire. Wouldn't be fairly smart. Couple more placeholders for different objects. This could be some type of tool rack. Maybe these are tools that he uses in the smith, in the workshop, or maybe these are tools he created. Just being as rough and loose as possible right here. So I took a look at my original, and I could see that I have this design motif of these wood slabs. So we'll throw that on the back wall. And this video is a little bit sped up, so I slowly sped up this front sketching portion. And when I clean up, I go really slow because not only am I trying to make clean lines, but I'm also staring at my reference for quite a bit of time, thinking about the objects and the tools and their design, and how can I, you know, alter the design to better fit our needs. Wasn't too crazy for that barrel we had over there. It was kind of in the way. You know, maybe he got angry from when we created our layout line drawing of the top view, and he's like, I'm gonna move this over here. It just makes more sense. But that way he could toss a bucket there and fill it with whatever he needs to. Just quickly sketching everything in, laying it out. Nothing too fancy. Alright, so here's that fireplace. Trying to picture what it would be like, you know, what kind of design can I have. I know we're altering from our original where we had it cylindrical, and now we have a more rectangular one. Sketching some different objects, get some overlap, get some randomness. We had way too much rectangular work areas going on, so let's see if we can switch it up a little bit. And, you know, definitely just have some fun with it. And this goes by super fast. So if you're not happy with this, or if you're able to, you know, present this to your art director and they're not happy with it, you're not really wasting that much time. I think into this sketch we're probably less than 10 minutes into it. You know, 5 minutes video time, but since it's doubled. So it's really just about getting quick information, seeing if we can get an approval either by ourselves or by an art director, and moving on from there. That way we're not laboring hours and hours into the illustration aspect of it. Because we got to remember, this isn't meant to be a pretty image. It's meant to just be information for the team. So the more information we can jam in here, the better. So we're gonna just drawing in some additional little areas. Looking at my layout on the floor, I see I had some box here, but that would have been way too narrow of a area for our character to navigate through. Especially now that everything has started to be elevated, I can get an assessment better for how big the space is. And I don't want him to have to, turn sideways and squeeze through to get through that little path right there. So we'll probably have to move things. And pretty much this is similar to, moving into a new house or a new room. Imagine if you just rented a brand new building and you're a blacksmith and you're moving in here. Well, time to empty out the U-Haul at the time. Whatever, it was probably called I-Haul. But yeah, you're going to have to rent that out, drag all your stuff out, lay it inside the room and start placing it. Doesn't work in the left area, move it over to the right. Got it too big, saw it in half. Can't fit your king bed in here? Got to downgrade to a full or a twin, It's really just about making the space work for you. So that initial setup, that layout of the room with the actual, the walls, I would say 4 walls, but we got 6 walls. So that layout with the 6 walls, that is our limitation. That is what we can work with. It's now just a matter of how can we make this work. So that's kind of that post in the doorway. Looks like we have a little opening over there, but maybe on the right side it's still closed wall, and then, he can hang something there. Whether it be another tool rack, bulletin board, doesn't matter. And when we're drawing stuff behind these walls, such as the fireplace, as long as we have enough information that the next person in line, the modeler, whoever it may be, understands what's going on back there, we don't have to draw it all in. But if there is an issue, we can draw another see-through wall, such as we've done with the front, and continue to draw behind. Let's draw in some windows, see how those will look. This was looking just a little bit puny. Make it bigger, move it over. Photoshop allows us to cut, copy, and transform. So super rough right here. But this is the important part. This is where I have my headphones off, music's not playing, and I'm just focused, looking at my reference, coming up with ideas, focusing on my layout. I remember Feng Zhu said it perfectly in one of his demos. He basically said that at this very beginning phase is where he's using 90 to 100% of his brain power. This is where he's really trying to limit as much distractions, but it takes the least amount of time, which is very true. Afterwards, when we go into refinement phase, that's when I start playing music. I use 10% of my brain power, and I'm really just focused on replicating my initial idea just into a better presented image. Refining all the designs, but this is where it's really important. And that's why I'm as sloppy and loose as I can be, as long as I can understand it. Because I'm going to be the one interpreting it in, another couple minutes here. I thought we can just sketch in the sign real quick. Not too bad. Covers up a little bit. And I also apologize in advance, since when we're gonna get onto the cleanup phase right now, it might be a little bit, because I zoom in a little bit here and there. So hopefully the screen doesn't go too crazy when that happens, because it's sped up. Hopefully it doesn't give you guys a headache or anything like that. But shouldn't be too bad. We're about to find out, I guess. And overall, this did take a couple hours to do. So don't feel like you have to go as fast as the video because this is obviously sped up. I'm sure there's a lot of you faster than me, and there's some that are probably slower. But I probably spent about, half of a work day on this drawing. So at least like 4 hours or so. Gotta do proper research. Complete the sketch. Obviously if we didn't even have that blacksmith interior in the top left, we'd have to figure out what it is we were doing, which is going to take additional time. So now I'm just prepping the layer for my cleanup phase. Or prepping the file, I should say. So this right here is going to be my focal point. Even though this is a very informative drawing, we still want to have a focal point for everyone looking at the image. And not just because it's an image that we want to have a focal point, to be a pretty image, but because we want the player or the viewer to understand this is where the action's going down. This is where they should have focused their attention to. It's not the patterns on the wood on the wall. So here I want to include the most amount of information and detail. This is where I'm going to have the most amount of tools. I'm going to begin by sketching around this. So this is, similar to a face on a character. It's the most important area of the room. Doing some refinement on ideas of what some of these objects were. They were kind of just, blockouts before, but now just looking at my reference, trying to understand what some of these can be. And I use multiple layers here and there. I try and have everything on one layer, but when I want to draw something in front of something else, to have that overlap, I'll create a new layer so I can erase underneath it without erasing what I just drew in. So that's doing it right now, drawing in this object. We're on layer 8. Once we have it drawn in, we're going to go back to layer 7 and erase that part of the table. It makes life a lot easier. Still not being too tight with this because, once again, just want to get in some information. I can clean it up to my heart's content afterwards. And anytime you guys see that fade, it's because I paused and restarted the recording. And that's just because, unfortunately, before I lost some files, so I really want to do my best and, save as many as possible. That way, in case I do lose a part of the recording, just restart it up. So this is obviously a lot of banging is going to go on this table. So we're going to throw in these bricks and blocks of cement underneath to kind of stabilize it. Can really take that impact. And that's why it's kind of damaged. It's not the prettiest piece of work equipment, but it gets the job done. Just looking at different tools, thinking of different placement, putting things on his side of the table, since he'll be mostly in that open space over there. Everything else is pretty cramped. He's not the cleanest of blacksmiths. His intern is not doing a good job at keeping this place tidy. He has me as an intern, that's why. So here we have that new layer. Draw on these hanging objects. After, we'll hop back onto the layer underneath and we can erase right underneath it. As you can see also, I'm not worried with line weight one bit. I am using a type of ballpoint like pen where it fades, but I'm keeping a consistent pressure on it. And as you can see, we're looking at a very basic line weight. This is, you know, about just a general standard line. You know, it's just a line 1. Later we'll go in with our 2s and our 3s and darken things up. Everything is drawn pretty similarly. I cannot draw an ellipse for the life of me, so I had to flip the canvas so I can be more comfortable. And warp it. That's how much of a phony I am. And then when I really can't draw it, I'll just bring out the ellipse tool. Just do a stroke path. Benefits too of flipping back and forth is you can start seeing when things aren't making as much sense. Maybe the perspective's off a little bit. As you can see that I altered over there. Especially when we're working with ellipses on the ground, they have to go with that third vanishing point, so that's why it's kind of leaning to the right a little bit. And it doesn't matter, you know, if we're drawing, you know, little details or just the block out. We already have the sketch underneath, so we know what to follow. So here playing with the idea of, you know, having some of these, it's not a perfect square in this pit. Some of these bricks are coming outwards. Or inwards, I should say. Which is cool because when you picture this place lit, each one of those little rims is going to catch a nice highlight from the fire. So it's just additional overlap, giving a nice sense of scale and depth into our piece. Minimal, not so essential, but it definitely helps. You can draw all these details by hand, or you can go ahead and, you know, create them flat, warp them into perspective, doesn't matter. You use the line tool. Since I'm drawing a majority of this by hand without, you know, using line or ellipse tool, I'm trying to keep that same look. So I flip it because it's easier for me to go from left to right as well as slightly upwards when I'm drawing my lines. If I kept it like this and I was trying to draw those lines, it'd awkwardly be a motion for me trying to go from right to left, or even left to right but downwards. I kind of train my hand to draw my lines a certain way, and that's, you know, just what I use. If I was doing this on paper, I'd have to flip my page around, turn it over, you know, 180 degrees in order to get those lines. Or, of course, use a ruler. Which brings us to another point. You guys can shift click as well if that's easier for you. See, like that was a little bit awkward, and you can see they're not so straight as lines. But no worries. And what's going to be most important here is a silhouette, and that's why I'm not super careful with it now. because I want to wait till I have all my information in order to refine the silhouette line and really clean it up. Decided that was a little bit too far. He didn't really have any room to work, so let's push it in. And then I realized that this couldn't be perfectly flat because it had to go down. You know, that's where the fire is going to be. So that's what we're drawing in right now. The benefit of reference easily put me in check. So as you guys are doing this, I'd like you guys to take a moment and think what type of room you'd like to design. You know, it doesn't have to be a workshop, obviously. Preferably an interior. That way it's a nice targeted space that you can focus on and not really have to, you know, complicate it with miles and miles of landscape. Right here we're just focused on, what is that, probably about like a 20 by 15 room or so. That's pretty manageable, I'd say. That way we can really design out our objects and design out the layout. So what other rooms can we do? Well, first thing I'd like to do is, if you didn't have the previous lesson on the creating the levels, just come up with your own idea. So first thing is establish a genre that you want to design within. So here I picked a little bit more of a medieval time period. The easiest way to think about it would be past, present, or future. This is obviously past. So after we do that, then we can, you know, twist the genre up by adding in, is it a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi? How much fantasy? Is it, you know, realism? What location of the world does this take place in, if it is of, you know, our current world? And typically in a work environment, all of that is already going to be established. But since we're doing this on our own, we have to establish it ourselves. So here, it could be fantasy, it could not be. You know, there's no real sense of magic. There's no sense of any mythological creatures or fantasy, you know, beasts that are in the area. Everything is pretty grounded in the real world. And then after that, when we find design or determine where it is and what time it takes place in, establish the level of technology. You know, obviously there's no computers back in the day, so I'm not putting any screens or anything of that nature, no electronics. Then it's a matter of focusing on what materials we're going to use. And this is where a reference really comes in handy. So here we basically have bricks, we have metals, as well as wood. And I think that's all that we use. You know, just different types of, you know, cements and stones, woods for different tables and workbenches, and then the irons, that is what the blacksmith works with and creates weapons and tools. And then it's up to us to decide if we want to add glass to the windows and whatnot. But my reference really helps put me in check. I had some reference from medieval time periods to give me an idea of the materials, and I had some reference of more modern workshops to give me an idea of what additional tools and devices could be used for shapes. But in those ones, I'm not looking at the materials. You know, I'm not going to start drawing in some power sockets, no electric cords, no light bulbs. We can have lanterns. And that's what really helps keep us just focused on our world. So we did a quick check what it looks like without the sketch underneath, and it's starting to get there. We still got a bit to go, but you know, once again, that's the focal point. Everything from there on out is going to gradient. So here we could be a little bit looser, a little bit faster with the lines, Little less information for actual objects. Less details, obviously. Let's keep this table in a similar design to the other one, but we can alter it just a little bit. The other one had those front wood planks covering it. This time we'll keep that little triangle aspect in there. Some boxes of stuff, because everyone needs boxes of stuff. That way he gets different shipments of materials from different vendors, or he's ready to ship out materials to different buyers. Maybe he had a bulk order, or maybe it's just an empty box that he now puts stuff on top of because he didn't have enough tables as is. All because of his intern. But you could see what I'm doing. You could see that I'm really trying to get into this character's mind. And that's why when I started working on this workspace, I didn't just think tool workshop. I wanted to get a little bit more specific so I can understand exactly what it is that we need. So that I understand it's a blacksmith in his necessities really allows me to become the blacksmith and think of where I would place things and how I'd want to move around here. You know, you're your own blacksmith right now, as you get to pick and design how you want your location. And a good amount of this stuff, I don't know exactly what it is. If I was really focused on this for a project, I'd probably study a lot more. But right now I'm kind of mimicking some of the shapes and tools I see. Obviously I have an idea for how they can operate, but I don't know exactly what it is that they all do. Obviously that is kind of like a little bit of a grinder. It has its rotating function. Different tools and long pointy sticks all around. Different pliers and devices to grab stuff, all of different lengths and widths. Here's maybe some type of clamp. You turn that device right there on the end. And then if you think for a game too, those kind of items are very important. They're the kinds that you walk up to and then the controller will, or the screen will all of a sudden say, press A. And then you press A and all of a sudden your character starts twisting it. Then you have to keep pushing A. And that way you start, designing gameplay as well. We're not, a level designer per se, but it allows them to pick and choose and start including those types of interactions. And that clamp being on that side, that the part where the character would grab forces the character to walk over there as well. Meaning he has to go and fit through this little aisle, and, the whole reason why we designed our space like that was to have all that interaction in the room. Random rocks and bits. I haven't exactly decided what the floor is yet. Is it dirt? Is it wood? Stone? Sand? Could be sand. Not very efficient though, but it could be. But I did know that I just wanted some additional details on the floor, so that's why I drew in that those rocks there. So here I'm just drawing out this barrel. Flip the canvas left and right. Realize I'm horrible at drawing barrels. I should never try to draw an ellipse again in front of you guys. That's why I give myself crap from the get-go. I don't even give you guys opportunity to make fun of me for them. I just admit it. But don't worry, we'll fix it later. Alright, some additional bins. more rocks. And the reason why I'm tossing in those rocks is I don't like that empty space. It's too empty for me. I want additional information. And that way too, it breaks it up, and you know, you could, while looking at those rocks, they kind of lead your eye to follow that curved path. It's kind of a way that we can control focal points, as well as, you know, direction and interaction. There we go. That's how we correct it. We cheat. But like I said, it's not about the final drawing, it's about the information. We want to have proper information so we don't hand it off and then they look and be like, that's an interesting wonky barrel, and design it like that, and it's all lopsided. And then, you know, when the art director sees it, like, what the hell's going on here? Like, why did this get created like that? For a wonky world it would work. For this more realistic type of approach, probably not. Let's work on this tool right here. Drew in the bottom, copy paste, bring it up, warp it just a tad bit, duplicate it to get some of those bevels and edges. It has a little bit of a wood rim, and I already know I'm not going to be able to match that line, so I'll just copy paste it, enlarge it. You guys would have died seeing this in real time. It is just not fun to watch. It's fun to do. Then you look at the timer and you're just like, oh, it took me that long? But this isn't a race. That's one thing that we gotta remember. And I'm also just doing this for demo purposes. So if this was for actual production, I'd spend a lot more time in research, just really focusing on it. But for a demo, I think this does a good job of getting information across, give you guys a good direction. Let me know if not, of course. You guys are the perfect judge. Perspective was still a little bit off on that barrel, so corrected it. And you can see I'm kind of working all over. I'll work here, something will catch my attention down there, I'll go fix that. It's all just a juggling act for me. Go to that basket, come back to the table. Check how it's looking without the sketch. Let's bring the floor back in here. When you draw on the floor is when you realize that some of your perspective is off. Like, ooh, gotta fix that table. Gotta fix that table. It's also a good way to start working on the back wall, which is what we're about to do. And we're not too far from finishing this off right here. So we have a majority of our details in, our drawing and our objects. And now we're kind of just flushing out the rest of the design. Getting the back wall, getting some more detail. Then we're going to bump up line weights. as well as solidify anything that we weren't happy with. What's cool, for me at least, is I found it really awesome when I was able to assign a shortcut key to turn on and off a layer. And I have mine assigned to F4. I'm not sure what the Photoshop default is for F4, but I jacked it, I went to keyboard shortcuts, I went to layer, and I assigned it, so now whenever I'm selecting a layer, I could turn it on and off just hitting F4 without having to click. I found every time that I had to click on the little eyeball, I wasn't focused on the actual painting or the design. I was focused on the Photoshop tool. So me being able to do it to a key really lets me just turn it on and off and see if I'm happy with what I'm doing on the screen. So I just thought that was a nice little tip that you guys can do as well if you're interested. I am a total hotkey whore. I grew up with games and I was all about keyboard shortcuts. So just making my workspace as comfortable for me was very important. I'm sure you've noticed I had shortcuts for, turning on and off a layer, for adding a layer mask, for opening the color palette. And it's all these things that are little tiny icons I can never click on. They're way too difficult for me. I'm like horrible at it. So I gave them hotkeys and it made my workflow better. So anyone else having difficulty, I suggest you do the same. Here I wanted to have a nice little evenly spaced out grid that I can warp into perspective. Use my line tool a little bit since I know I wanted these really straight. And I think I was tired of drawing straight lines I was going to fail at. Drawing those lines sometimes comes in handy, especially for these type of interiors where not everything is perfect. A lot of these tools are handmade. They had no lumber mill at this time, so this wood they had to make it themselves. They didn't have all the equipment that we have today. No factories. So that's why I'm kind of, like loosely sketching this in. Wasn't happy with it, so we'll ditch it. Thought it might be cool if we offset it a little bit. So let's try horizontal. Nope, let's go with vertical. The reason why I prefer vertical is if we had it horizontal, I've decided on a wood floor, so it could be a little bit confusing with the floor just looking at it. So just having that nice separation of vertical versus horizontal is really beneficial. Alright, cool. Let's see. Can we cheat? Can we cheat? Aw, yeah. We can do it. Copy, paste. My favorite Photoshop function. So kind of eyeballing the spacing on the left, trying to make sure it matches. If we wanted to be anal, we can fully plot it out, get the correct spacing. I just want to get mine as close as possible. You could see my layer sorting is on and off. So what's cool with these little wood pieces is they get to break up the silhouette up top. I find that really helps just bring more interest into the actual artistic point of view on this, as well as give more information that there is a second story, or there is a roof above this. So we're going to keep sketching in, get some thickness on that back wall. gives us a better idea of sense of a scale. Alright, starting to look good. Turning the sketch on and off, seeing what we're missing. I saw that we had that sign in, taking a look at it. Do we want to toss it in? Do we not? So this is kind of my quick sketch version of it right here. Decided that I didn't want it blocking that information there. So we'll leave it out for now. See if we want to go ahead and just plot in the window back here. So this is one of those that doesn't match up 100% to the original sketch, but we're kind of working with our layout. We refined the walls, so we want to see if we can fit it there. Here's some janky bookshelf or tool shelf. So this is one of those things where if we were to look at that object by itself, we would kind of picture the certain height and width, but seeing it in this space, we get a better idea for the sense of scale, and it's a lot smaller than what a normal bookshelf would have been. So that's maybe at, you know, a little less than eye level, the top of it, or maybe even a little bit higher. Alright, here's some additional parts on the wall just to get some more interest. Extra areas for our character to hang some items and to place stuff, as he's not messy enough as is. That barrel was way too huge. It was kind of messing up the scale in our room because everyone kind of knows what the size of a barrel is. And that one was just out of proportion. So that's what we're going to spend time fixing right now. Some additional details. Ways to bring more interest into this. That can be some sort of frame or whatnot, but we're not going to fully dive into its design just because that's out of our focal point. We don't want people focused over there. Some of these objects were having some perspective issues, as well as issues with the object itself just because it looked a little bit off balance if you were to hold it a certain way. I'm sure those of you that have ever held one would understand. Random goodies here and there. Alright, so here we turn off the sketch and let's go ahead and correct some line weight. So this is still our focal point. So that's what we're going to kind of silhouette out right now. And we're not only focused on silhouette, but mainly on overlaps. So whenever an object is in front of another object, or, you know, it's the exterior of the object, so it's in front of air, which means it's in front of the floor and whatnot. So here we're kind of just adding in more design details, correcting silhouettes, trying to hit the backs of these objects so they can really pop out in front of the items in front of them. You know, we're going a little bit outside the focal point, so that's why we're not going as crazy with it. But we still want to have that overlap there. Turn it on and off, make sure that it's actually doing something. It's kind of working all over. Zoom out, look at it, see what needs a pop, zoom back in, hit it. And you could see if you look at the zoom percent, we're at 200% zoomed in right now. Meaning that it's a decent sized file, so when we zoom back out to 100, everything looks pretty crisp. So this is only just to hit that last additional point that we never really zoomed into this depth at this type of degree earlier. Or maybe I did and I'm lying, but I don't think so at least. I typically zoom into about 100% when I'm drawing, which would be one step back from here. Pop those back walls. Go flip and zoom crazy so you guys get a nice little seizure. My flip is also bounded to a hotkey. I believe that's F5 on mine. Just saves me the click, 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 flip. Alright, so we're getting there. Coming up on the last few minutes of this. Just quickly toss in a little bit more detail, just so it's not so plain. More overlap, random objects. And I'm also doing this on an extra layer to the line weight so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. I have my original sketch layer 7 there, but this is a separate line weight layer with all the information. And the reason why I do that is it allows me to, just like right now, go ahead and cut an object out. Or if I need to use the eraser tool, I can still erase it. Otherwise, if it was just only the line weight without the previous sketch, then I have to flip back and forth, and it's really just going to take me out of my zone of focusing on the layout and the design and the image. But you guys can definitely work with whatever's comfortable with you. So, just finalizing some of these parts right here. Gonna go ahead and correct the chimney. And then we're just gonna raise it up a little bit too. So that way it just sticks out a little bit more for the silhouette. And then we're gonna have to draw back in as well. So just gave it that extra layer right there. Using the smudge tool to kind of extend these down. So I didn't want to draw on this whole beam right here across the front because it'll hide a lot of stuff, so I'll just kind of hint at it. You know, definitely take your artistic license and apply it right now. Alright, so before the floor looked kind of lifted, now I'm actually going to go ahead and drop it. Seeing what works best. And that's going to work best. Just have it flush with the ground plane outside. So that thickness underneath is actually a wood thickness now, meaning that it was kind of dug out prior to being positioned. Put in a fancy arrow. When your arrow isn't up to par, so you have to redraw it and warp into perspective. Yep. But it looks clean, right? Cool. Alright, so here we're going to go ahead and let's see if we can get some wood texture on the bottom. I don't want it everywhere because it might be a little bit too distracting. So what I can do is if I get these lines in for the wood planks, I can apply them with a mask. So I hit my mask, I got an actual texture brush, and I'm just revealing certain areas. That gives us that nice little, you know, that nice wood texture without being overpowering and overwhelming. And it'd be the same thing, you know, if that was the actual, you know, when we're going into modeling phase and texturing phase. We don't want that to distract the player. So we can control that with thickness, with value, with amount of texture information and detail. So you can see right here we're just going in some with additional textures. Just kind of zooming all over the place. And then just some final breakups here and there. Final little bits, some more rocks. And then after, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our sketch layer and we can reveal some of the initial sketch. And that way it gives us just additional information, not overpowering, definitely going to be on a light opacity. So let's do that here in just a moment. Yeah, this is where we zoom in and out like crazy. Trust me, it makes sense a lot more at real time. Fast forwarded like this, it's kind of just like, okay, this guy's on crack. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Let's finalize it. Alright, and then we're going to go ahead and just toss in a very light opacity back here to separate it from the front, or from the white. Play with the opacity of the sketch underneath. And it looks like this is going to do it for us, guys. So once again, thank you for joining us today. Here's the final image. And I appreciate you guys really making it this far. Hopefully you guys were able to get something out of it. Definitely go ahead and ping us if you have any questions, as well as information on what else you'd like to see for future tutorials. Thanks and have a good one.